Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining this session on enterprise search in the new age of AI. So today I'll be joined, so my name is Frederick also. I'll be joined by my colleague Vanessa, and we also have a special guest in Harvinder from BP, with whom we will be doing a fire chat within the next kind of 30 minutes of the event. So the actual topic that we want to cover with you today, and here's a brief agenda, is really looking through the enterprise search evolution, and really looking at some of the technological breakthroughs, but also some of the research and the users' expectation across enterprise search. But it wouldn't be complete without showing you some elements in terms of how those breakthrough, how that evolution is appearing not only in our technology, but also how that is being used by some of our customers. And for that particular matter, we decided to invite, and Harvinder kindly agreed to give us a view in terms of how within BP knowledge management is not only an integral part, but also how the approach, the current status, and a view in terms of the evolution of that particular program. Now we've set aside about 15 minutes towards the end of this session to allow more question and answer for all of you. Now we have some people looking after the chat window, but also part of that Q&A, depending on the time that we have. Then there is also more of a conversation that we could be having. So if you're going to topic, as I mentioned before, especially around search, the user expectations are really shifting. Now, don't get me wrong, the fundamentals remain the same. Search is very much measured by the quality of the recall and the quality of relevancy of the answers. However, with some of those new approach and the evolution is really the chat interaction, whilst you can iterate through the questions and the answers, and Bing has been a really good example, and how it has evolved from just providing a list of relevant either sites or articles. It's now actually giving more of a conversation, whilst actually providing citation to build the trust on the results that is had, but also looking at that searchable additional element, and actually the evolution of the expectations are also interestingly enough pivoting, especially in the enterprise, towards the enterprise security level, the data policies, the data ranking, and all of those elements need to actually be included in that aspect. And that's why it's really important to actually bring the strength of both worlds, of not only what generative AI is bringing with its large language model capabilities, but with the enterprise grade search, where you can actually leverage all the built-in security, but also looking at all those specific either language vocabularies, but documents that you have in the enterprise. And this is where we're going to go through in a bit more details in terms of how you enable a new way of searching within your own organization to really drive that next level of productivity. So before going through some of that, I think it's important to do a little bit of a timeline in terms of the journey on some of those AI breakthroughs that are actually relevant in the enterprise search context. And actually, it's not just the text element that I think is relevant. It's also, and that's what we started in the timeline in 2016 is around the object recognition element, and Microsoft again was the first organization to reach that human parity element. But then you can see the speed at which innovation has been driven, and especially more recently with the generative AI capabilities that the OpenAI research company has made available. But something that maybe is not as obvious to everyone is actually, Microsoft runs all of its services on Azure AI, and here are some interesting numbers that just put it into perspective, some of the scale and some of the approaches that you see in terms of what we build is also what we use in a lot of our services, and a great way to show that also is giving you some of that aspects in terms of all the different levels at which AI is being infused, and some of you will be familiar on some of those more customer or scenario based services and customizable kind of AI models, of which Azure OpenAI service is one of them. Now, the recent event of the generative AI discussion and being in a lot of people's mind has reignited really the discussion around responsible AI. Now, responsible AI and its principles and its ethics is not really new. It's a journey on which Microsoft started quite a while back in 2016, actually, where we started to put some of the concepts in responsible AI, and you see some of those particular aspects that not only are internal to Microsoft, like for example the ether committee, in terms of all what we do has a committee that double checks on the AI principles that we've set up, but actually going through the years, bringing more organizations, more thinkers onto that particular journey, in making sure that framework and those principles are anchored in as much as we can, even from a religious point of view. You see in 2020, the Rome Call was also a very interesting step within that particular AI. There's a link there, and we'll share that link as well. It's worth a read. But that evolution also is not about words and the ethics and the principles of it, but also some of the tooling that we are making available within our solutions, and more is yet to come. And for any of you who have seen some of our announcements around Build, it's worth keeping an eye out, especially around the responsible AI aspect. Now, there is a concept that I think is really important to put in mind, is really looking at the AI models to become more as platforms rather than what we have been maybe used to in the traditional way, where simple models were very much purpose-built for one particular use. Where now we're moving to a AI at scale, that it's much more of a massive model that just provides really, in a way, that science of human guidance. And we'll go a bit more into that particular concept later. And what we feel that was quite important in setting up the context is showing all the work that Microsoft itself with research have been investing around AI and what OpenAI is bringing to the party. But in no sense is a one versus the other. It's more about that combination of all of those capabilities. Would that be the Azure Cognitive Services or the Azure Applied AI Services, combined with the OpenAI aspects to look at, the better ways in terms of you can do search, you can interact, you could do knowledge management, you can monitor better content. And I think that is a really important aspect of the background that we need to ground ourselves in. Now, the Azure OpenAI service in itself is quite different from what you can get straight from the OpenAI, API services. And it's really adding that, enterprise grade security element, building that responsible AI that I was mentioning earlier, but also being able to leverage a lot of what you have within your Azure subscriptions in terms of how you secure it, how you tie your data sets and your different applications. Now, in the context of the enterprise search, what we've also noticed, there's a pattern in terms of capabilities that our customers tend to actually leverage. And again, I'll come back, it's not one compared to the other. It can also be a combination of those multiple use cases, from that end-to-end call center analytics to the customer 360, but more often than not in the business process automation. And some of those examples and capabilities hopefully will trigger some ideas for yourselves. But without further ado, I think it'll be a good time to actually have a view in terms of the demo of that. So Vanessa, over to you.
Thank you, Fred. So as Fred mentioned, we look at the theory, let's now look at the practice. So I would start, before I show you how can you really leverage OpenAI and cognitive search to have a ChatGPT-like experience in your own organizational data, I want to take one step back and first look into the OpenAI service itself. Let's understand how those capabilities that Fred mentioned can be used, but also what are some of the limitations in this new paradigm that we are looking at this session. Fred, could you move to the next slide? I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with Azure OpenAI, but when you create an Azure OpenAI instance on Azure, you have access to a playground. This is what we are seeing here on the screen. Very similar to what happens with other AI services that we have. We have a few examples and a few best practice and documentation that you can follow. This is a really easy way to understand the service. In this case, I'm selecting one of the models. I'm purposely not selecting GPT 3.5. I'm selecting DaVinci because I want you to understand how behind the scenes the API works. Azure OpenAI is just an API, and as any other API will receive an input and will give an output that will show the prompt and the response. What I'm typing here is I'm asking, please explain me what is Azure Cognitive Search, which is quite typical for the topical for this session. This is the prompt. What I'm receiving back in green is basically the response from the API, where it's saying that Azure Cognitive Search is an Azure service that helps on building advanced search applications. So until up to here, nothing new. So let's try a different example and see what the model will return. In this specific case, and I want to be quite up to date, you'll see in a minute, I'm asking who won the Eurovision in 2020. So when I ask this, it's saying that the 2020 revision contest didn't go ahead because of the COVID, which is relevant and is accurate. So now let's change a bit and ask about what happened last Saturday. So who won the revision there? And here what you'll see is that the model is saying, I don't, and let's pause here, Fred, just so I explain this part, please. In 2023 has not yet taken place, because one of the things, and I'm not sure if everyone is aware, these models have been trained to data up to 2021. And because I personally think that is because of answers like this, there is a misconception that if I want to have a similar experience with all of my data, organizational data, I need to train a model with all that data. And then there come concerns around data security and data privacy and so forth. So let's look into why that is not the case. If you can restart the demo, Fred. So what I will be showing you here is exactly what Fred was explaining a bit earlier around this change on paradigm to creating models not for a single use, but instead have models that learn skills, and you can apply those skills independently of use case and industry. So what I will be doing here is I'm going into change my prompt, my input to the API. I'm opening one of the news article and I'm copying the information from that news article into my prompt. So similar to if you go back to your primary school days, where your teacher will give you a text and will give a set of questions and will ask you, can you answer these questions, taking into account this text, is exactly what I'm doing here. So it's not that I'm training a new model with this new data to be able to answer that question. I'm just giving in the prompt more information, and I'm giving clear instructions, as Fred was saying, is very important. How do you give instructions to this API on what I want it to do? So I'm saying, given this article, and you'll see I will rephrase the question, can you tell me who won the Eurovision 2023 that happened just last Saturday? And I think this is really one of the things that I want to make it clear, because it's a misconception. So you do not need to train a model and send your data to anywhere, organizational data in that sense, to be training a new model from scratch to be able to use and have a similar user experience. And you'll see here, the model came back, it didn't change anything, saying Lauren was from Sweden, was who won this Eurovision contest in year in 2023. What I'm now asking, and this is just to explain why this paradigm is different, and why all of us are quite excited and like the user experience. I'm asking, how did she react? And typically, you could do this in any search engine before. And what will happen is we'll find the right paragraph related to the emotions, and we'll show you that emotion. We'll literally copy and paste or show you on the screen the paragraph related to that question. If you look into the answer that came back from this model, not only, yes, he showed me the answer, but he's saying she reacts with joy and gratitude. Because what the model is able to do, similar to ourselves, has a set of language skills where he's able to interpret this text and is able to generate new content, summarize content, and so forth. So Fred, please, we can move forward. So now that we have seen this, you might ask, okay, if the model is capable of doing all of this, why do I need Azure Cognitive Search? Can I just not use Azure OpenAI service and send all the documentation I have to the API? For people that have worked with APIs before, if you have developers on listening in on the audience, you know that there are limitations to it. But knowing the demand for this type of experience and pattern, we create a toolkit and we are evolving in terms of the solution. This is available for everyone. It's a GitHub repo that you can deploy with a few clicks. And what we have done is taking advantage of the best of both worlds. If you recall, Fred showed you a slide talking about that. The enterprise-grade search that you get with Azure Cognitive Search, but also the generative AI that you get with Azure OpenAI. So if we move forward to the next slide. Just in case any of you are not familiar with Azure Cognitive Search, in Azure Cognitive Search is a service that allows you to ingest data and structure data from multiple sources. As you go and ingest that data, you can call a set of different inbuilt AI skills or bring your own custom skills to enrich the index that you are creating on back of those documents. This creates one or multiple inverted indexes that you can then use through a search capability that is similar to any other public search engines that you have used in the past, but on top of your data. What is the difference? Is that we are moving from retrieving data purely to what we call a retrieval augmented generation pattern. So we are using Azure Cognitive Search to be able to find what is the relevant information and retrieve that information, but then we are using Azure OpenAI to augment and generate the answer relevant to the user based on that content. And nothing better than we go through a demo to understand that a bit more. So let's do this. This, as I said, is the repo is available to everyone. I will copy the link in a minute on the chat as well. What we have done, we have uploaded to Azure Cognitive Search a series of different documents related to a fictional company that we like to use in Microsoft called Contoso. And fun fact, we create these documents using OpenAI itself, and it's related to different benefits and so forth. Behind the scenes, we use Forms Recognizer, one of our AI service, to OCR, extract the content, the text from these files, and then we store it in a cognitive search engine. What you see in here is the web app front end, and what I'm asking is a first question, which is included in my plan. And as you can see, it was able to retrieve relevant information. Similar to Bing, also in this example, we provide you citations. And this is really important when it comes to responsible development of these applications. You can find not only where this data came from, but then in the front end, you have this concept of supporting documents. And in this, if you can pause here, Fred, please. In this is very important because this is the first step I was telling you about. So similar to, if I go back to the example I gave you in terms of your primary school, let's now move forward a few years. When you were in university, as an example, you were giving an assignment. The teacher will not tell you, oh, the answers to this assignment are in this specific text or book. It was expected that you would be going to your local library, as an example, and giving the assignment. Similar to what happened in cognitive search, is similar to what happened in the library. You will know, given these topics, this is the section of the library that is relevant. This is where the books are in which shelf, for example, and these are the books that are relevant. So that is the part that the role that cognitive search is playing in this architecture. What we see here in supporting content is when I asked the question, this question was sent to Azure Cognitive Search, and Azure Cognitive Search retrieved out of all those documents and all those paragraphs and so forth, which ones are important and which ones should be sent to OpenAI to get and generate an answer as well. So if we continue, Fred. So another important aspect to highlight, and we'll highlight here in the demo, if we can continue with the demo in a minute, is it's basically the context. Another myth or misunderstanding when you use some of the interaction we have with ChatGPT is that he has a continuous memory and is always keeping your data, and these models know what we have been doing behind the scenes and so forth. So you saw here, I asked, what about dental? I didn't give any other context, and he answered me once again properly based on the documents that I have, but retrieve a set of different documents that were related to the dental cover plan. So how does it happen? So what you have in this application as well that is really cool is you can go to this thought process, and if you go in this thought process tab, you will see what is happening behind the scenes. So remember what I showed in the OpenAI Studio. This is the prompt that is being sent to the API. So you can see that behind the scenes. You see that as part of the prompt, I pass the sources that are relevant. And if I look a bit further down, I also pass the previous question and the previous answer. And you can control how many answers do you pass or not. But that is one of the differences. Do you have this kind of meta context and system messages that you can use and leverage as part of GPT 3.5 as well. And that's why is optimized for this conversational type of design. And this is important also to understand. It doesn't really memorize or keep that data anywhere. It's part of the prompt that you are sending to the API. So now just to finish on the demos, I'm asking a different question. I'm asking, can you tell me what are the performance reviews? And in 1 second, you'll see it came back once again, taking only your content and the data that you have, because that is part of that prompt. On the prompt, I specify, give me an answer based only on these sources, if you remember, and gave me an answer. What I want to show you here is sometimes people ask, how difficult is it? To program, and what is important or not. And Fred talked about this science of human guidance when it comes to prompt engineering. So what I will be doing here is translating that exact same question to my mother language, so to Portuguese in this case. And then I will ask that question in my application. If there are any developers here, it's not that I'm doing something that was not possible before. Before, between your app layer and your backend layer, you could have a logical layer that's saying, if someone writes something that is not in English, translate it first and then send it to the search engine, because my documents are in English there. So what is different is what is required to do that. So you'll see here not only it understood the question even being in a different language, but returned me an answer in Portuguese as well. So let's look at the code a bit and see what is required to have something similar to that. What is the code that I need to write, or how do I tell the model to have this specific behavior? I'm calling out here in the repo that you see the architecture is exactly the same as we discussed before in terms of using cognitive search in Azure OpenAI. You will have access, if you deploy it, exactly to the same front end that we have been demoing. And I will just go a bit into the code, and don't worry, I will maximize it so you can read it into one of the Python scripts. And what you will see in this Python script, you'll see exactly the same thing I show in the thought process, but that was one example that has been instantiated, where you have a meta context saying this assistant is used for this purpose, and this is the type of behavior that we want. But then if I scroll down, what you will also see is that I specify, if the question is not in English, translate the question to English before generating the search query. And this was the only thing in my code that I needed to do to be able to offer to the end user that type of behavior. And this is quite important in multinational organizations from a diversity inclusion point of view. So you can see it's pretty simple, but it's very important that prompt engineering that you have there. So in terms of deployment, as I mentioned, you can do it with a few clicks. I hope this help understand how to bring it together. The reason why we need to use cognitive search and OpenAI is because of the limitations that we have on the OpenAI in terms of the tokens. With GPT-3 is around 4,000 tokens, and the token in average is around 4 different characters in English when you speak in English text. With GPT-4, we have a higher number of tokens. We are talking about around 8,000 tokens in that area. But still, and you don't need to have multiple documents. If you have a single document with, let's say I was the other day with a customer doing, looking into their quarterly results report, they had hundreds of pages. So it would be impossible for me to pass in the prompt the text of all those different pages, so I could then ask questions about it. And that is why you need this combination of the power of Azure Cognitive Search and the power of Azure OpenAI to really bring you a ChatGPT-like user experience, but secure, responsible, and also on top of your own organizational data. And I will stop here. Back to you, Fred.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. That gave me a chance to have a little bit of drink to stop my throat being so dry at the start. On this particular section, we are so pleased to have Harvinder with us to really bring even more reality to what we've been discussing and talking about a bit earlier. So Hi, Harvinder. Thank you so much for joining us on this webinar. Would you mind introducing yourself to the audience and describe your role within BP?
Sure. Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes, and we can see you as well.
Okay, perfect. Good topic. Good start on a Monday morning. Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from whichever part of the world you're joining from. I'm Harvinder. I'm the knowledge management platform and services lead here at BP. I'm based in Houston, and as part of I'm a part of the digital technology department within our innovation and engineering entity here at BP, which primarily focuses on these upcoming technologies. And as part of the service which I lead, there are main focus areas around the area of knowledge discovery, which is around search, finding information, as well as around knowledge mining, which is more pertaining to extraction of data. So yeah, that's where and I have squads working in this area.
Very good. So based on all those responsibilities that you were just describing, what is the current status of this particular program within your global organization?
Sure. So before I go into the current status, Fred, what I would like is to also highlight where the typical challenges we faced within large organizations, right? Yes. So that might just help set the context. And in any global organization such as Microsoft as well, or BP or any large organizations, the issues which we always faced was silos of information always remaining within particular teams. And over a period of years, decades, and BP is a pretty old organization. So what we figured out was there used to be information or knowledge captured in various formats, right? Present in different places, whether it could be captured in a document somewhere, whether it could be captured in a physical handwritten notebook, or captured in any other digital format like a SharePoint site or anything else. And the main challenge was large organizations, if this knowledge wasn't basically easily discoverable or searchable, then there would be teams who would actually try to redo the same thing again and again, which is obviously not best use of our time and effort. So the whole idea was to essentially come up with an avenue, with a platform. We call it as a knowledge management platform, wherein we establish some standards, some guidelines into how knowledge, how information can be actually surfaced in a very, very easy to understand manner. And obviously, you could imagine that, especially from our perspective, where users are coming in from varied backgrounds, not everyone is, equally at the same level of understanding. So how to actually present that information in a fashion that it is easily comprehensible by anyone, right? So in lieu of that, there have been several programs, late 90s, early 2000s, within our organization focused on knowledge management. They were primarily focused on each of their areas of work, whether you could consider it was upstream or downstream or trading refinery. What we set forth was, in terms of a platform, if we could actually bring these together, come up with a particular approach or a standardized approach where information from various parts of the organizations are surfaced in a consistent manner, then that would be really, really helpful to the users. So in 2020, our organization obviously pivoted and had a a reinvent, wherein we've announced to the world about how we are going to reimagine energy for the planet. And as part of that, a lot of programs were also reinvented or rephrased into what exactly they should do. And one of the programs was ours as well, which was more around the knowledge management. And at that time, what we took a decision was to actually re-platform our knowledge management platform to utilize some of the inherent capabilities which the Azure platform provides. And we saw a value add in that in it is because by virtue of moving or utilizing some of the Azure Cognitive Search services, we would be able to tap into some additional cognitive services which the Azure platform would provide. So basically from 2020 up until middle of 2021, we replatformed. We are started utilizing the Azure Cognitive Search, which is where majority of our unstructured content we started indexing. It's available. And then since then, the whole idea was to actually further enrich and add and utilize some of the more advanced or enhanced capabilities which the Azure Cognitive Services provide, whether be it the Vision API or the language, speech to text or things like that. So that was one of our, I would say, the current status. We have explored into different parts of the organization as well, just starting from one, and now we are slowly spreading into different entities across BP.
And thank you, Harvinder, to retrace or provide us with a synopsis of that really important journey that you've been through in terms of knowledge management. And on that journey, what would be maybe some of the scaling conundrums that you had to solve, or maybe looking at repeatable patterns across the different businesses? What kind of experience can you share with us on those particular aspects?
Sure. There were many, I would say. So one of the main issues what we had was around the sheer amount of data, right? When obviously when we're talking about when we talk about knowledge and information, it's like it could be in the form of unstructured and structured. Now one of the thought processes was, okay, how do we combine the two, right? And that's a difficult one to really solve. But purely from an unstructured data perspective, what we did find out was when we talked to various entities within our organization, each one of them were at different levels of maturity in managing their information estate, right? So some of them were very methodical in the sense everything lined up appropriately with the right guidelines. Some of them were pretty much starting in their journey, which means not a lot of processes were there. So essentially getting hold of the right set of information, even to the aspect of who is the right owner of that information was a big challenge. Aspects was also where we had issues where there would be huge or large documents previously created, and which would be, okay, how do we now ensure that this becomes a part of the the index, and what are the challenges, right? In our industry, obviously a lot of it is focused in terms of what the reports we get, not just internally we produce, but even external. So how do we consume, how do we make sense out of those reports shared by our partners, right? How can they be easily extractable, and whether is that something which we could train it once and use it multiple times? And there are some examples wherein we were essentially able to utilize some of things like what Vanessa was alluding to, the forms recognizer, for instance, right, which helped us in a particular scenario where there were different reports being sent by various different vendors, each having different format. However, utilizing this model, it really helped us save us quite a bit of time to really reinvent the whole wheel again. So that was definitely a plus sign, in that sense.
Right. And so you and your team have been really at the forefront in looking into what the Azure OpenAI service could potentially bring to the program that you drive. What has been your first impressions of that new capability, and how do you see that potentially transform what you're driving within BP?
Sure, perfect. Good question, Fred. So just to articulate, so what we had done, as I said, we had re-platformed our discovery platform in the Azure Cognitive Search from an end user perspective, going back to asking our users and customers about what they wanted in terms of a knowledge discovery was obviously, the user demand was much more, wherein, what they wanted was, okay, we just don't need a capability of just doing phrase-based or a keyword-based search, which is normally based on the common BM25 algorithm. But what they were really looking for was, can we not actually connect the dots, right? So if, let's say, if I'm looking for a particular information, it would be good if I also find that, oh, such an information was already searched by someone else, or he or she is an advisor or the expert in this particular topic, or let's say this particular the topic which I'm searching for is related to another important topic. So it's almost sort of a web-like, I wouldn't call it as interface, but the sprawling of information. So the idea was, how can we bring this together? And we were trying out various mechanisms within utilizing Azure Cognitive Services, things like entity extraction. We also tried out the semantic search capability, wherein it would be more focused on intent-based search rather than a phrase-based or a text-based search, right? And we were achieving, I would say, relative success in that as well. But then with the announcement of, the OpenAI and more specifically the Azure OpenAI, obviously talking to a few of your team members, we quickly wanted to go ahead and do a pilot in terms of really seeing for ourselves what is the art of the possible, right? So what we have done, just as a quick pilot, I would say, is from one part of our business, we took around a few thousands of our their documents. We actually went ahead, which were already indexed as part of our Azure Cognitive Search Index, and we went ahead and tried to do what we call it as a summarization, which was the text summarization of those documents. Now, those documents where I would say of the nature of lessons learned, case studies of the past, and so on, which was a good, I would say, a source of information, because that's typically which a user would actually go ahead and query against. Okay, what are the learnings from the past, right? Can I look at it? So that's why we chose that particular, those set of information. We definitely received a very, very good positive feedback from our end users in terms of how the Azure OpenAI, the text summarization worked. To an extent of it was able to summarize to the level which the users could get it, really, rather than having to scroll through the whole, let's say, document or a guide. So that was the first step. And then the second step, what we wanted to achieve was essentially a capability of giving our users a more natural language way of, and answers. So what we were typically earlier returning was, okay, if they searched for something, we would return, okay, this is what your information is present in this particular document. It was mostly links to documents or the sources of information, whereas now, utilizing the capability which was showcased by Vanessa, we were able to actually go ahead and provide them with a more natural sentence telling, okay, these are, the information which they desired, which was pretty good. And one other thing, we were also being very mindful of how this information was being generated, because one of our key prerogatives was to ensure that the answers being generated are from authentic sources. So we definitely included what were the citations which it used. Right. So the initial feedback using those, a few thousand documents was really positive.
No, very good, very good. Thank you so much, Harvinder. I'm quite conscious of time and wanted to give an opportunity for the audience to ask us questions. So I'm not sure if the monitoring of the chat window has produced any particular questions at this stage. Nope, I can't see the chat, so that's the reason why I'm asking the particular question. Okay, there was an aspect that I do feel that we wanted to give a little bit more in detail the view, especially around the Azure OpenAI service, and Harvinder, we've been through some of those particular aspects within your own organization, but here what we wanted to give maybe a view for the audience in terms of how do you securely manage and drive the actual OpenAI capability. Vanessa, if you're still on the call, do you want to go through that particular aspect?
Sure, it will be a pleasure. So very quickly, one of the differences of Azure OpenAI is how you can secure, and we briefly comment about that earlier in the call, when you can secure the service. And when it comes to this security, there are different aspects, from the networking, who can access the service, the compliance of the service, but also how the data is handled. So this diagram summarizes very high level what you have available in your own organization where you're trying to deploy these services. And we are, I would say, quite proud to the fact that these services adhere to the most strict, let's say, standards we have on the Azure. So from a networking perspective, you can deploy within VNets, with private endpoints and so forth. Is all from an authentication integrated with the Active Directory as well. We have a set of compliance, and I will share a link that you can learn a bit more about these compliance standards that we have, like ISO and Germany specific standards, depending where you are based, as an example as well. And then the ethical AI that we mentioned as well. From a data perspective, we do not use your data to train any of the models. We do not use those to fine-tune the models either, and all of that is part of our SLAs. But one of the things I always like to call when I present this picture is that all of this is not a Microsoft only ownership or responsibility, is a shared responsibility between Microsoft and yourselves. So while we provide you the mechanisms to secure the service, it's important, and we guarantee you that your data is secure and is encrypted at rest, is encrypted in transit. You can encrypt your customer managed keys if you want, and so forth. You play a big role on that security as well, the way you configure the service, but also the way, from an ethical perspective, you use the service as well. So if we move quickly to the next slide, Fred, please. So when it comes to responsible AI, and I love the fact that Arvinder touched a bit on this topic, in a sense of we made sure that the answers that were given to the users were grounded on the documents that we had. We make sure that we include citations so the end users could, have a critical mindset and look at the answer and say, is this correct or not from a response perspective? So in our documentation, this is just a very high level snippet of it, but in our documentation, we have in our transparency note a series of different guidelines on how is a new, let's face it, is a new technology, yes, and we are all learning and improving on that. But there is two big aspects on it: is how can I make it secure? How can I manage the risk as well? And what we try to summarize here is what you should do when it comes from a customer perspective. We talked about structuring those interactions, controlling who can access your application, making sure that you only give people access not in anonymous, but knowing who is doing what and having that telemetry and logging, having transparency in your user interface, things like including citations, giving the ability to give feedback, so you can use that feedback to improve your own application as well. From a technical perspective, as part of the Azure OpenAI service, we have content filtering and abuse monitoring. Depending on your industry and what you're trying to build, you might want to add on top of it another filters and verifications as well, and have that kind of transparency note internally as well. I think I'm a huge believer that innovation is a good thing. We just need, and people, 80-20 rule, most of the times within your organization will not do things wrongly purposely. So it's important that adoption and education and create awareness of what the service is capable or not capable of doing it, and what is the right way of using the service as well. Not sure, Fred, if you want to add anything to this.
No, I wanted to thank you for your input. A special thanks to Harvinder also.
And just before we finish, yep. Apologies, because I think there is a question for Arvinder.
Oh, is there? Okay.
Yeah, I just noticed. So Arvinder, if you don't mind, a quick question from the audience. We're saying, what is the next area you are looking at trying the AI in?
Okay, sure. There are definitely a lot of, I think, use cases, what we say. We have been seeing it. Now, there could be things like, especially, I know, there are areas or departments which we are looking at standardizing some of the, let's say, the invoices being received by the organization from different vendors. So that's one thing which we are trying to look at, if the same can be applied in the sense of advising some of our vendors and partners of different formats which they can use. There are reports, typical, I would say, inspection reports, which are being generated. Now, the idea being, once those inspection reports are there, then how do we actually make or infer, or and advise of the next steps? So there are two things to it. There's one, which is from a particular report, you could only extract the information. But then the second step is essentially, once the information is extracted, how can you actually use it to influence how do you perform better, right? So we here at BP, we always have, so which means ever through the journey, whatever we have learned, what can actually make us perform better? So these are some of the examples wherein, we want to actually leverage, these or I would say these information from, and then eventually also advise us on how to perform better into the future. So I think those would be a couple of ideas. I wasn't sure if they were looking at a much more generic answer in terms of AI, but we have very specific targets to go after.
That sounds great. Thank you so much.
Any other questions in the IM, Vanessa, that I haven't picked up on?
Not at the moment, but we still have a couple of minutes left. So if there is any other questions, feel free to type, and we will address those as well.
If not, I realize that being able to give some time back to people is also very valuable. So I just wanted to really conclude on our session here today, and the world of search, and especially enterprise search, is transforming and changing at a rapid pace, and things that I really want you to remember in some of those aspects is that actually the human input and intervention will maximize the relevance of generative AI, especially in an enterprise search element. But the co-piloting of human productivity is really just another way to describe what I mentioned earlier in terms of that science of human guidance, which will really transform the way we work moving forward. But more importantly than all, to support all of this is really designing responsibly for the human interactions, but that being done by the humans themselves. So I want to thank you all for your attention today, and wishing you a good rest of the day, and thank you for your attention. Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.